Welcome to MythMachine, guys. Hope you're having a good one. Zack Snyder's Justice League has been out on HBO Max for a couple of weeks now, so we are going to start looking at all of the differences between the Snyder Cut and the 2017 theatrical release. Today, we're specifically going to look at the differences between the scores for both films, so let's do it. A film score can honestly make or break a good film. Music is one of the most powerful tools that any filmmaker has in their arsenal to tell the story that they want to. It helps convey emotion from the characters. It also tells us as a viewer what we should be feeling as we're watching, and it can do a really good job of getting us inside the heads of the characters that we're watching without saying a word. Now, the score for the 2017 version of Justice League that was released in theaters and directed by Joss Whedon was scored by Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman has done tons and tons of movies. He's a frequent collaborator of Tim Burton. He also did the scores for the first 3 original Spider-Man movies. He's got a fantastic portfolio and is one of the greatest living film composers today. That being said, when the film was released in 2017, a lot of people were very unhappy with the score, mostly because it was completely different in tone from the 2 previous films that this was a sequel to. The tonality of the film score just felt completely different, and while it would have fit very well in a Tim Burton film, it just did not work for this style of superhero movie. And so, with the release of the Snyder Cut, Zack Snyder brought back his original composer, Junkie XL, to finish up the score. Now, they scrapped every little bit of the score from the previous version of the film and rewrote the entire thing. Needless to say, it is very, very different. There are some drastic differences here. It's actually pretty insane and incredible to see how different these 2 versions are, just in terms of the score. So let's take a look at a few scenes. We're gonna compare and contrast and see how each of these different composers tackled the exact same scene. Now, I've tried to isolate the score as much as possible from the actual dialogue so that we can just focus on the music, but you will still hear some sound effects here. Now, we'll start with Danny Elfman's score in the theatrical cut. We're starting near the beginning of the film as Bruce Wayne is coming upon the village that he's been searching high and low for. He's finally discovered it, and this is where he is going to meet Arthur Curry, and it kind of sets up the rest of the story. It kicks things off. Now, you'll notice that Danny Elfman kind of portrayed this sense of mystery with his music here, which is great. But he also does this kind of interesting thing where he's using this guitar, right? These little guitar plucks that almost give it this Latin vibe. Now let's move over to the Snyder Cut and see what Junkie XL did. Now, you can tell that both composers had kind of the same goal here while writing for this scene. They both wanted to convey a sense of mystery, a sense of foreboding, but they both did it completely differently. I really liked the way that Junkie XL brought in these horns, these kind of sweeping horns, and his instrumentals are just a little bit more full here. Now, Danny Elfman has kind of these orchestral flourishes here. It almost makes the scene feel a little bit larger than life, like what these guys are pulling off is this bigger thing than it actually is, where I feel like Junkie XL here takes a more subtle approach. Instead of going really big with the score right off the bat, he lets it simmer and it's kind of a slow burn, but then when it gets big, it gets big. But I kind of feel like Danny Elfman's score makes these villains feel like almost mustache twirlers, right? That you would see in an old cartoon. Whereas Junkie XL's score just instantly makes it feel like it's more of a heist. Like these guys are intelligent, they've been planning this out, and now they're about to get things done. It's definitely a darker, more grounded take, I would say. And since we're dealing with hostages in this scene, it feels a little bit more appropriate than the sometimes whimsical things that Danny Elfman likes to throw into his scores. Now, this next scene is a big one because it's the first time that we're introduced to Wonder Woman in this film. And I really actually like what Danny Elfman did here, where he used the same theme that was used for her in her previous two films. Junkie XL, as usual, takes a darker approach here, but I will say that the theme he uses here, the kind of female vocals that come in, while they work for me in this scene specifically, the reason that I like Danny Elfman's take on this better is just because this is frankly overused. Junkie XL threw this in pretty much any time you see Wonder Woman, and by the end of a 4-hour film, you see her a lot. If you're sick and tired of a theme by the end of a 4-hour film, it means that it was definitely overused. In a 4-hour film, you have plenty of time to sprinkle that in tastefully, but if it's every 5 minutes, and I know that's an over-exaggeration, but still, if you use it as much as he did, it starts to get wearing. And by about the 2-hour mark in the film, every time I heard that song, I was just gritting my teeth. It was like nails on a chalkboard. I was like, please, let's just listen to a different song for once. So while musically there's nothing really wrong here, it's just the repetitiveness of it that I didn't like. Now, this next scene is actually a really, really interesting one, because as I've said at the beginning, a score can make or break a film. You can have a really great film and have a terrible score, and it's gonna make that film more mediocre. If you have a great score and a terrible film, it's going to lift that film up. But music is just as important as the lack of music. So here is a scene where Danny Elfman chose to score the scene, and Junkie XL instead chose not to put anything here, to let the character's emotions do the talking instead of the music. Now, while I really do like Danny Elfman's subtle score here, I do feel like Junkie XL's version with no music actually works a little bit better, because it forces us to be in the moment with these two characters. And the acting here is phenomenal. The facial expressions, even here without the dialogue, really work, really sell what's going on. And you're almost just in it. It's a little bit more realistic if there's not a score that's telling us what to feel here, especially when it already works on its own. When it comes to music, sometimes less is more. Now let's move on to an action scene. I loved this scene of the Amazons trying to keep the mother box from Steppenwolf. And honestly, I think both scores and both versions of the film work really well here. But still, let's look at the differences. So Danny Elfman's score here is just a little bit more lighthearted as usual, but it also feels like it would just be in an adventure film. It fits right in there. He's got this choir singing in the background, so it almost feels a little bit angelic. But then we go over to Junkie XL's score and the percussion just kicks in. It's got those big, deep synths that come in that just tell us Steppenwolf is a force to be reckoned with and he is coming for you. And now continuing on with this scene, back to Danny Elfman's version, it just feels empty without that percussion, right? It's a chase scene, and that percussion just keeps our heart pounding as we move forward with the characters as they're running away. And Junkie XL does something here where as they get the mother box onto the horse and they're running away, there's almost this triumphant swell, right? We think that they're gonna do it. The music is telling us that they're gonna do it, and then all of a sudden Steppenwolf shows up and the music quickly changes, and now we know that all is lost. So while Danny Elfman's score absolutely works in this scene, for me, Junkie XL is doing more of the heavy lifting on the storytelling department. He is telling a story through his music. He's enhancing what we're seeing through what we're hearing. Now let's take a look at a scene where we're introduced to Aquaman for one of the first times in this film. Now again, I think both scores work really well here. The difference for me is I think you can take Danny Elfman's score from this scene and you put visuals of a villain on top of the music and it still works. It almost does nothing heroic, right? While it does swell and it gets big at this moment when it should, it doesn't tell us this guy is a hero. Whereas Junkie XL's version, the way that the music swells, the chords that are used, the instruments that are chosen here, just scream, this guy is our hero. And for that reason, I definitely prefer Junkie XL's version of the score for this scene. Two nearly identical scenes where the score gives a completely different message, vibe, and tone. Now here, the music feels a little bit comical to me. Let me just play a track really quick that I'm sure you've all heard called Flight of the Bumblebee. Now let's watch this scene. Sounds pretty dang close, right? I feel like you could take Danny Elfman's score from this scene and throw it into a Tom and Jerry movie, or any cartoon for that matter, and it would fit perfectly. Junkie XL's version here is so much darker. It really makes it feel like Superman is a force to be reckoned with, which he absolutely is. Now, as Superman or Clark meets Lois for the first time in this film, it's obviously an emotional moment. And while I think Danny Elfman's version absolutely captures that emotion, it, for me, doesn't do much in terms of storytelling. While there's nothing technically wrong with it, it also feels a little bit just like background music. Now, Junkie XL incorporated themes from the previous movies. The Superman theme is a motif that he has changed up and used a ton throughout this film, and this scene is just one other great example of that. If you've been a fan of the previous two films, this music instantly brings up so much emotion that we feel between these two characters. It brings up all of the history from the previous two films and makes us remember that in this moment, just as they are remembering their relationship together. The Danny Elfman version also feels a little too uplifting for me near the end when he flies away, and then it just gets kind of quiet. It's just dead space, where I really like what Junkie XL did here, where it gets really big, it starts to swell and it gets really emotional, but it also leaves this sense of foreboding afterwards. Like, hey, I know he's okay now and he's leaving with Lois, but is he actually okay? Can we trust this guy? This next scene is another huge difference. Danny Elfman takes a more traditional approach where he's got all this orchestration. It's something you would definitely hear in one of his Spider-Man scores, but Junkie XL bringing in the guitars, bringing in the percussion, mixing that with the orchestration just makes it feel so much more full. It makes this moment feel a lot more epic than it did in the previous version. Again, Danny Elfman is incredibly talented, and this is not a hate video on him. However, while there's nothing inherently wrong with this score here, it doesn't really add anything to the scene. But Junkie XL, using that hard-hitting, driving percussion, paired with the Man of Steel theme that we've heard throughout, that we've heard in the previous two films, again, brings out the emotion and the memories that we've had from the previous two films. And it instantly makes this moment about Superman, and that's who it should be about. He's the one who just came back to save the day. Now, just like the Flight of the Bumblebee section of the score from Danny Elfman, this scene also does not work for me at all. It's very light, fluffy, airy. You could take this song and put it over almost any romantic scene in any rom-com, and it would work perfectly. This is a triumphant moment, right? Our heroes just won and went up against unfathomable odds and overcame them. And Junkie XL's score matches that feel, matches that tone. It feels very heroic, and it also builds. It doesn't kind of just plateau and stay lovey-dovey. It gets big when it needs to get big. In this final scene with Clark and Bruce together, Danny Elfman decided to go a very safe route. He brings back in the acoustic guitar, it's all sunshine and daisies, but Junkie XL goes a completely different route, where it does still feel final. It does still feel like everything's good. Something about the orchestration in Junkie XL's version is a lot more foreboding. While it is epic, while it does kind of finalize everything, it feels like the end to a film, to the end of a story, Junkie XL's feels like the culmination of something. It feels like all of these different things and story points that we've seen throughout the film are now coming together, and this is the musical version of that. The Justice League theme that has been established throughout the entire film is used here as these two heavy hitters in the Justice League. These two guys who were mortal enemies but are now partners, come together and help each other out. Danny Elfman's score just doesn't really do anything for me here. And the final scene with Superman just feels so much more epic in Junkie XL's version. I think the biggest instrumental difference between these two scores is the percussion. The beats and the drums that Junkie XL uses just keep the story driving forward. And while the runtime is twice the length of the previous version, it keeps us engaged. It keeps us wanting more. When I hear this last bit of score from Junkie XL, I'm ready for the next movie. I want to see what comes next. When I hear the one from Danny Elfman, I'm like, okay, cool. So what? And there are tons and tons and tons of other examples in this film of different ways to tackle a scene through score. The music in the Snyder Cut gives us a completely different tone and feel compared to the theatrical cut. Honestly, it just fits the story better. It is a dark story. It is a story about resurrecting the dead, alien invasion. It's dark stuff, so the music should reflect that. 9 times out of 10, when it comes to comparing the score for these two movies, I side with Junkie XL. I think the only time that I'm 100% on board with Danny Elfman is when it comes to the Wonder Woman track. Oh man, That thing just gives me nightmares. But let me know which versions of these scenes work better for you guys in the comments below. Guys, make sure you hit subscribe as we break down the other things that go into play in making this film so different, such as the color and editing, just to name 2. If you like this video, please leave a like, check out these other videos if you're interested, and I'll see you around.